Alright, so here's a new video for you. This will be kind of a slideshow type tutorial because I didn't take any video during this process, but I did take a whole bunch of pictures showing just about every step along the way that I took. And this was just a spur of the moment type of project. I just decided I needed something to do with my time, and so I decided I would make a wood mini goalie stick from scratch. And I wanted to kind of experience an authentic style of building it. So it is a three-piece stick. You've got a shaft, paddle, and the blade. I'm not really any kind of a woodworker myself. I do have that ability to think my way through a process, and maybe it's not always the right way, which you might see in this. Overall, it was a fun project. I took my time with it. Some of the stuff is about waiting for glue to dry, and other stuff was just about my availability at the time. So I'm going to do this slideshow walkthrough on how I did it, and I'll come back at the end of the video.
So getting started, we're going to bring in the flat board. This will be what we use to make the paddle and blade. It's a 24-inch board, so we're going to mark off about an 8-inch section, cut that, and then we're going to use this new piece, the short one, as the blade. And it's very important that we probably not use the edge we just cut, rather we would use the factory edge. We're going to rotate that, and these two edges are going to line up together to make an L shape. I stacked 3 or 4 of the cutting discs on the little shaft, and I used that to route out the edges, and I went with basically the depth of what I could get from the disc. So essentially half the diameter of the disc, a little bit less because of the metal shaft. Then we want to measure this one to get our length, bring the shaft board into here, and we're going to be cutting off a piece of the end there. So we're going to flip it on the edge because we want the wider part of it, and that's the measurement we just did, and we're going to do about the thickness of the groove. Cut that off and trim that down so that it fits inside of that groove, and we want to make sure that it fits where it's twice as deep as the groove so that it will connect these two boards together. We'll do a dry fit and make sure. I did have to shave mine down a couple times and trim it. Trial and error. Remove it, and let's bring in the Gorilla Glue. Make sure you get that in the grooves. Now insert it and slide them together. Notice I have some overhang on the smaller section for the blade. That's due to the angle of the blade from the paddle. You'll want to make sure of that. I then clamp it down. I used clamps to hold it to my work desk, as well as the long bar clamp to squeeze it together. That way it didn't move or shift. Now we need to make our pattern. I used craft board and a toy mini stick, which I then made a pattern by tracing it. Cut that out with my X-Acto blade and a straight edge. And then I didn't like how narrow this one was, so I split mine right down the middle so that I could use both sides of the template to expand it a little bit. So we're going to overlay that on the L-shaped board we made. Now notice I use the far right edge of the tall board, and that's so that I can use the seam of the two pieces as the seam where the blade would be attached to the paddle. Again, we're just going to mark it off. Get rid of the template and cut it. I used a jigsaw, but you could use scroll saw too. Once we've cut that out, we're doing good. So now we're going to go back to the shaft board. We need to trim off about a 1/2 inch from this. And I marked mine off at about 16 inches. So we use a saw again. In this case, since I didn't use a table saw, I had to mount a straight edge to my scroll saw. And then I was able to run the board through and get a nice, even, clean cut. So now we have our two main pieces. Now we have to work on attaching them. So we're going to bring these in and we are going to overlap them about 3 inches and trace that edge right there. Now we bring in our jigsaw and we cut that section out. Now we have these two pieces and we're going to do the routing effect again. So we want to route them like this. We're going to make an insert that goes in there and overlaps the two pieces. So again, I used my tripled up or quadrupled up cutting disc and came in here to the depth of the disc, and this is what I ended up with. So now we have the extra piece from the end of the shaft board, and we're going to use that to make our connecting piece. Flip it over, slide it underneath, and we're going to trace that opening on it. But we have to remember something. We don't want it to be the same size as that. We want it to be as wide as the groove we made. So we're going to make sure we measure the inside of that groove right there, which means we're going to expand out our lines, and we're going to bring the saw back. We're going to cut that down and thin it as well, and then shape it to match the angle of the top. Now we'll do another dry run, make sure it fits in there nice and smooth. We don't want it to be too tight, like I don't want to tap it down with a hammer, want it to be able to go in by hand. Now we're going to attach the top piece loose and double check them to make sure there's a good fit there, do any more modifying that we need to do. So our next step is we're going to glue that piece into the shaft section first. So we're going to fill some Gorilla Glue in there. And then slide the piece in. Clamp it on there and be patient. I believe it says it cures in about an hour. I usually give it a couple hours at least. Once that's dry, we need to attach the shaft to the paddle. So we're going to put some glue inside of that. And slide them together. Then I add a little more glue to fill that hole a little bit, which will really get a good adhesion. Now we're going to clamp it from the edges and squeeze it good and tight without breaking the board, obviously. And be patient and wait. Now it's time to do some sanding. We have a variety of sandpaper from a coarse grit to a fine grit. Looking at the edge of this, we want to taper down where the shaft enters and overlaps the paddle. So we're going to sand that down and we're going to end up with a smooth transition like this. Oh, time for more sanding. Now we're going to look at the edge of the paddle. A regular hockey stick has a taper there on both sides. So we're going to use our sandpaper and taper that down so it comes from high in the center to a little bit narrower on the edges. We still want to have a flat end on it. Now we still have to deal with the fact the Gorilla Glue sinks in when it dries. So we have that line around where the shaft and the paddle meet. And I like to use JB Weld Quickwood, pull out a little ball of it and roll it out thin, break that into pieces and shove that down into those holes nice and tight. Don't forget down here where the blade attached to the paddle, there is a little tiny hole on there and there that you want to also fill with this. Once it's dry, it's time to sand. Now we're going to smooth out all that, and it's filled. Now we want to move on and sand with our different grades of paper until we're giving it a nice smooth finish on this entire stick. We should end up with nice beveled edges and smooth everywhere. Now it's time to prep for paint. Don't use the blue tape. Blue tape never seems to get a good edge seal. I always try to recommend using frog tape. The green stuff gets a very good edge seal. I don't have an affiliate link with frog tape. Trust me on this. But I used blue tape, and this is why I'm not happy with the end result of my paint work. Now we bring in our spray can. Try not to do this on your workbench. I typically do it outside. That little bit of extra blue duct tape you see on the toe of the blade, that's so I can poke a hole in it and hang it from a hanger in my garage to dry. So that's it for construction of the stick and the basic painting. There's one step left for treating the blade, but I want to cover that in just a minute. Right now is when you would do any type of graphic painting that you want to do on the stick, and I'm going to show you some pictures of how I did mine. I'll put some photos up here and up here to show you the masking I did. I used the process of recreating the graphics of an actual stick on my computer and then cutting vinyl, applying it to the stick to use as a masking template to then paint where I want the graphics. This is a little more complicated than just building the stick, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it here. You have to have the right equipment and computer skills to do these. So next step is just simply treating the blade of the stick. So to treat the blade of the stick, you want to wait until you're all done painting. And I use boiled linseed oil. Pour some of that on a real soft white cloth and apply it to the natural wood of the blade and heel, and you'll bring out a beautiful finish, and it'll treat the wood and make that look better for a longer period of time. Now you're all set. You just made a mini stick. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and you get a chance to go out and dabble in a project like this and DIY it yourself. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please subscribe, share, like, thumbs up, all that stuff. Hopefully you're staying safe and healthy, and we'll see you on a rink soon.